Have Quark pour you a big glass of nostalgia while we talk this week's
Initial codes. Part 1. Initial codes. Part 1. Initial codes.
Hello again, Lower Deckers! We're going to go over all the goodies from the 6th episode of Season 3. Hear all, trust nothing. I've got a wormhole full of spoilers if you'd like to avoid the Denorius belt now. The episode title is the 190th Ferengi Rule of Acquisition, which is going to be a topic on Best 5 Worst 5 on this channel in a few weeks. It's been just shy of 25 years since we've set foot on DS9, and it's nice to see some things never change. The episode is set approximately 8 years after the close of the Dominion War, and that timeline will come into play later in this review. With the obvious absence of most of the original main characters, this feels like an approximately Season 2 episode of DS9, where the characters are well worn in and playing the roles we expect them. I love this pile of nostalgia, but it does have some issues. The original plan was to meet the Vancouver that we last saw in Cupid's Errant Arrow for a joint mission before that ship is called to save a colony from a brown hole. Which, I guess gets a like for toilet humor? Being that the Cerritos was only originally playing a support role, Carol hasn't studied up on the Karma, and they avoid docking with DS9 and just kind of go around in the next like for emulating the intro of DS9. When that classic theme music hits, it hits you in a very comfortable place of feelings. While 3 of our main cast are excited to explore the famed DS9, Mariner isn't thrilled about returning to this previous posting. And maybe because she owes Quark a pile of latinum. She also isn't thrilled to spend time with her new acquaintance Jennifer, and her self-absorbed, over-the-top Karen brigade of friends. But I've got a like for finally acknowledging this romance teased earlier in the season. These two really seem to get and respect each other all the way to stunning themselves in the end. I've got a like for Kira keeping Sisko's baseball on her desk. And this scene where she's looking out the window at the wormhole and it's reflected, this is a beautiful moment where it appears she still is always waiting for the return of the Sisko, and brings us forward from where we last saw the character at the end of What We Leave Behind. She hasn't gotten a promotion in 8 years, and the fact that she's a colonel and not a Starfleet commander or captain by now signifies that the Bajorans either still haven't fully joined the Federation or still haven't folded their military into the fleet. I'm just going to give an overall dislike now for multiple instances where the passage of time doesn't feel acknowledged. While it does do the overall episode the favor of making it feel like a classic DS9 formula of Quark's shenanigans gone wrong, it robs us as fans of real answers and immersion of 8 years spent awaiting the return of the Sisko. But this like is for the world feeling lived in, as we find out Nerys and Shax were in the Resistance together, and the rest of the episode devolves into a contest of who has saved the other's life the most times, culminating in Shax knocking Kira out of the way of a Karma weapon in the end. One of the many battles they fought together was the raid on the Haru outposts Kira had mentioned back in past prologue, as an event she regretted. Taking Shax home to Bajoran space adds more to this wonderfully nuanced security chief. We can't continue without giving the man with the latinum stomach mourn a like. It feels appropriate to segue from Lurian alcoholic to the callbacks of multiple types of alcohol given as gifts to the Karma. Aldebaran whiskey, which is the substance responsible for Scotty's recurring "it's green" joke. There's the ever-popular, even if occasionally banned, Romulan ale, a case of Vulcan port that Quark once opened a multi-hundred-year bottle of, and declared junk. There's a callback to the pilot episode of Lower Decks in Gallardonian Spider Milk. There's also what I believe makes its first appearance, Ryzen Cabernet. I'm going to give a dislike, though, for the overall negotiations with the Gamma Quadrant Karma. Part of it comes from the aforementioned 8-year gap. I can believe they might have taken an 8-year break from trade with the Alpha Quadrant, but this representative doesn't know Quark at first. I still can't tell if this whole thing was a setup from the beginning to catch Quark with their replicator tech, or if they just find that out in the end. But no matter, this whole middle piece of the Quark story feels off, but perfectly like an early episode of DS9. The Karma disable the station and somehow the Cerritos momentarily with their secret weapon, and transport with Quark to their ship. Because there's still 3 more plots to talk about, Rutherford Tendi and an annoying Orion wannabe from DS9 are loading the alcoholic gifts onto the Karma ship when they try to take off through the wormhole with Quark. Tendi foils the Karma's attempted extradition in an awesome like moment. Through all his bluster of being a badass Orion pirate in Starfleet and making Devana feel uncomfortable the entire episode, when they need a get-her-done pirate type, he confesses he's really from Cincinnati and just tries to sound cool, which gives Tendi a chance to give a Mr. Rogers-style talk about only being concerned with your own expectations and not others. To which she immediately goes from cheerleader Tendi to mistress of the winter constellations, and single-handedly stops them from getting through the wormhole. Back on the station, it's discovered Quark was using Karma tech in his patented Quark 2000 replicators, and he kinda deserved what was happening to him. One of the other minor plots going on is what we can only assume to be a parallel to the time Riker took Quark to the cleaners and ended up with a voucher for his trouble, as Boimler makes a small fortune in Latinum at the Dabo wheel, and then trades it all for junk in the gift shop, which is a great gag that if you aren't paying attention to the non-focused foreground, you'll miss the payoff and another strong like for the episode. Even if it is just filler to give Boimler something to do. That leads us back to the Jen and Mariner plot, where we find out that there's an even more socially awkward group of lower deckers on the Cerritos than our main cast. I've got a dislike for this whole plotline of self-absorbed ladies so stuck on their spa day rituals they're willing to suffocate rather than put these spiritual candles out. This whole experience, though, does bring Beckett to a moment of self-actualization, as she realizes there are worse Starfleet officers than her. And she's a legend precisely because she takes the reins and does the uncomfortable jobs to keep people alive, like phasering everyone, including herself and Jen. While a high point for Mariner as a character, it's the bulk of the pacing issues midway through this episode's run, where it goes from nostalgic to dead before it picks back up on the other side. The cheeky Kobayashi Maroon joke isn't even enough to save this overall entry. There is, however, one tiny Easter egg that does get a like. Mariner mentioning that phasering Jen's friends isn't on her bingo card. This referring to the only recently seen Enterprise bingo played by lower deckers in Strange New Worlds, where ensigns boldly f*** around and find out. Interesting to see the practice survives as a ritual more than a full century later. I unfortunately have to give out one more dislike for Rutherford. After last week's solid Samanthan episode, he's just running around like a kid in a candy store whose parents aren't even paying attention. He shouts out 2 callbacks in this, both of which feel out of place for someone not from DS9. Jake and Nog's favorite spot on the second level on the promenade, and pointing out O'Brien's dartboard, which for some reason is in the common area and no longer in Quark's. This feels like one of those times where Lower Decks tried too hard to fit an Easter egg in, and worst of all, the dartboard is never shown on screen. Just shout it out, and that's a lazy, unnecessary addition. Which leads me to one final dislike for the promenade itself, which only shows us a Batleth's R Us and no other named shops, or even anything interesting going on in these shops. After a season where we've had 2 different setups that involve major groups of booths that look filled out, meanwhile this is just depressingly underdeveloped. It's also mentioned there's a tailor shop, but it's not likely Garrick anymore. So if it's meant to be a nostalgic joke, it's not, especially without showing us who replaced Garrick. Or did Garrick get exiled a second time from Cardassia and end up back on DS9? We may never know, but I hope someday we get Andrew Robinson back in the iconic role, even if it's only Lower Decks animated. This has been the most nuanced and long review I've done in nearly 50 episodes of Initial Thoughts. This episode has a ton of positive things going for it. while also having some stumbling blocks that I think could have been better if the writers had taken off their nostalgia-covered glasses this week. It was wonderful going back to DS9, and leaves me wanting a more expansive revisit to the tacky Cardassian monstrosity. Though a good chunk of the plot feels like it could have happened anywhere and didn't need to happen on DS9 for any reason other than ratings and bringing back beloved characters. Overall, fun and poignant though, as the season continues to churn out solid episodes to move the growth of our main characters along. Thanks for hanging in there with me on this review, and may you walk with the prophets. I've been your host, Dustin Wing.